who have been in a coma, what was it like from your perspective? Did you know you were in a coma? Story 1. A friend of mine was in a 6-month coma after an accident. Afterwards, he made sure to tell everyone around him to talk to people in a coma because they can hear you. But he noted that they should always tell the person in a coma what happened, where they are, and what's happening to them, because he said that his moments of lucidity were mixed with some truly horrifying dreams, and he had trouble distinguishing between what was real and what were dreams. He said he just wanted to be told what was real and what was happening. Story 2. I was put in an induced coma when I was 9 years old after a pretty bad car accident which left me with a fractured skull. All I remember is a bad dream about having a bad headache and hearing my older sister telling everyone, including my parents, to get the out of her way because she wanted to see me. I found out later that this was on the night it happened, and they were trying to calm her down before she saw me. Edit. For those who are telling me to let her know how awesome she is, I made sure to, not quite but almost, hug the life out of her when she got back from work. Story 3. I remember what put me in a coma. Then I remember being unconscious but hearing my parents, hallucinations, and then nothing for 5 weeks. My next memory is at home and my doctor visiting me. Edit im, not a Marine, been asked this like 20 times now today. Sorry for the questions I haven't answered, but my inbox just blew up too much. Story 4. My friend was in a coma about 10 years ago for roughly 3 weeks. Car accident. When he woke up, we visited him, and when I was alone with him, he told me it was like a lucid dream. The real world was gone, and he felt like he was in a world he could create himself for years. He was dead serious too. He talked on and on about how he had a slight understanding that he was not in the real world anymore, and that he thought he might be in heaven, about how he felt like he was actually dying and his last few seconds just stretched on and on forever. He said that's what it felt like. He mentioned that he could fly in the coma dream and that it was amazing. He spent a little while in the hospital, then went home, did physical therapy for about 2 weeks before killing himself with pain pills and vodka. People thought the pain was too much, that it was an accidental overdose, or that the therapy and the accident made him feel helpless and depressed. Honestly, I think he wanted back into his lucid dream world. The way he talked about it was like the best thing he ever experienced. Story 5. A few years ago, my dad was in a medically induced coma for about 2 weeks. Everyone thought he was completely unconscious the whole time, until he woke up and started mentioning conversations people had around him while he was under. This even surprised the doctors. He said that from his perspective, it was like he was asleep most of the time, but he would occasionally wake up and could hear what was going on around him without being able to move or do anything, before he would eventually drift back to sleep. Story 6. Dunno. I was in a coma for 11 days, severe brain injury. I don't remember being in a coma or waking up from a coma. I lost several years of memories prior to the coma, and my brain didn't really start to retain information again until 6 weeks after I came out of the coma. I'm told that my personality changed afterwards. I had to rebuild most areas of my life. It sucked, but it was probably a good thing, although I'd be lying if I said I never wondered what my life would be like if I'd never had the coma. Story 7. After being in a really bad accident that left one of my good friends, the driver, brain dead, they put me into a chemically induced coma for under a week to prevent brain damage due to swelling. When I first woke up, my memory was much better than it was as it gradually faded in the days to come. I have a journal my mother recorded things in, and I recalled many things I shouldn't have been able to immediately after waking up. Today, I have very little memory of it all, but I can definitely say that having positive people around you definitely helps when you're in a situation like that. If you have a friend in this situation, don't disregard them. Even though your life has moved on, they may wake up one day, and in their mind, not a day has passed since the last conversation they had with you. Story 8. I was in a coma for 3 days following a serious cycling accident, medically induced. I woke up with zero recollection of why I was there or what was said while I was out. It is easily the scariest situation I've found myself in, but I can't say I remember it. I woke up to my mom and dad in the hospital with me, and my body in traction of some sort, and that was way scarier to me. Story 9. I was out for 45 days, no white light, no tunnel, nothing. Woke up and couldn't remember who I was. For 6 months, never really fully recovered, so I just started life again. Turns out I'm a completely different person than I was, and that is a really good thing. I get memories now and then. They aren't pleasant. A woman came and sat by my bed for 6 weeks. Turns out she was my ex-lover. I couldn't remember her. Didn't recognize my mother. Afterward, this is the second time in my life I have related this much about my life publicly, and it has been good, and at the same time really painful. Thanks to everyone for being kind. I wrote this story 7 months ago and published it in the lounge, and I really hurt myself doing it. This time I wanted to share about the life afterwards, and I hope it has been of some benefit to others that struggle with mental issues. This place saves lives, gives hope and guidance to millions of people, and I feel lucky to be part of the community. Story 10. I'm not sure where I read it, but a girl talked about her experience, and she mentioned that it was like going in and out of sleeping dreaming. Just when she would feel like she was waking up, she could hear parts of conversations or the TV, but she would slip right back to sleeping. She also said when people would clean her, she could feel them touch sensitive parts of her like her armpit and butthole area. I'm an inpatient phlebotomist, and even though some of my patients are sedated, I still always introduce myself and say, I'm here to draw some blood just in case they could hear me. Story 11. My girlfriend of 6 years and sort of fiance was in a severe car crash when she was 16. Both of her best friends died instantly. She was the only survivor, but they didn't think she would make it. She was in a coma for 9 months. She was in what is called a waking coma. She retained normal periods of sleep and open-eyed wakefulness, but no higher brain functions. Here are some things about her experience. She doesn't have any memories of the year prior or the year and a half-ish after her coma, and obviously no memories of the car crash. She suffered a TBI, and when she first got out of the coma, she would get naked with people and anger very easily. These are common problems of people who suffer a TBI. She went back to school after the coma, but her brain was still healing a lot. She was held back another year because her brain was still not retaining anything. Today, she is a wonderful, bright 30-year-old with a college degree. She has a slight speech impediment, gets frustrated easier than most, and it took her a while to get driving down. Honestly, she still scares the out of me when she drives, but there are worse drivers out there. Story 12. The person I knew in a coma was in it for about 3 weeks and had no recollection of being in a coma. The doctor was saying his name real loud, and he finally woke up one day. The doctor asked him if he was insert real name. The patient said yes, and whom do I have the pleasure of speaking to? Back to the doctor. Story 13. I was in a coma for 3 days after an emergency C-section thanks to eclampsia. They actually lost me for a couple of minutes after they delivered my twin boys. I remember hearing the sound of my dad crying close by. I could hear people talking around me, but anytime I would try to focus on what I thought I was seeing, it was like looking in a kaleidoscope. Story 14. I was in a coma for about 2 weeks following a cardiac arrest as a teen. I was technically dead for over an hour, in fact. People often ask me if I could hear my family talking to me, or if I was dreaming. The answer is no. There is a huge hole in my memory beginning about 2 weeks before the coma through a week after waking up. And waking up is in quotes because I would wake up, ask a bunch of semi-incoherent questions, fall back under, then wake up again and ask the exact same questions, in the exact same order. Repeat 6 or 7 times. The coma was not even blackness. It just does not exist. I remember having the hardest time believing it was actually mid-October when the last day I remembered was late September. Story 15. I had a seizure and was in a medically induced coma for 3 days when I was 17. To be honest, I don't remember anything. I remember fading in and out of the anesthesia trying to pull my breathing tube out and that my hands were restrained to the bed so I couldn't. When I woke up and was coherent, I couldn't recall anything from actually being in the coma. They had even moved me to a hospital over 100 miles away. It was really just nothing but black. No dreams, no lights, no voices, just nothing. Story 16. My mom was in a coma, and she recently told me it was horrible. She was in a wreck that killed her, technically 5 times heart stopped, and she said she could feel all the pain, hear the doctors yelling that she was being coded. She said she thought to herself, wow, whoever that it must be dying, and then realizing it was her. She was trying to scream and tell them she was alive, but nothing ever came out. Edit for clarification. When I said she was clinically dead 5 times, I was just detailing the severity of the situation. She was in a coma right after that for a really long time and described the inability to scream, hearing people, pain, etc. from while she was in the coma. Story 17. Copy-paste from an answer 7 mo ago. Yeah, how I ended up dead is kind of a long story anyways. I had gone to bed one night and I hadn't been feeling well for a couple of weeks, thought it would go away eventually. I remember feeling confused and somewhat found myself in a dreamlike state, although I was pretty lucid in it as well. There was quite a bit of psychedelic-like experiences, and it felt like such a long dream. It just kept on going and going. I didn't have a body anymore, and I actually asked myself, am I dead? Since this couldn't be a dream, usually when I become aware of dreams, I wake up, and I wasn't waking up. It felt like it went on for so long. What was going on? This part I had no recollection of. I guess somewhere or sometime in my sleep I had stopped breathing. I may have had a seizure at some point, and I was pretty lucky. Family had stopped by the house to check on me, noticed my car was still in the driveway, which meant I wasn't at work, and I wasn't getting the door, but looking through the window, they could see me just laying there in bed not moving. I wasn't responding either, so they went through a window and I was unresponsive. 911 was called, etc. I believe it took them a couple hours trying to get me back and keep me stable, But my lungs weren't working, so they had to intubate, and I was in a coma with life support, all that fun stuff for about 2 days. They ran a bunch of tests. I don't remember getting a spinal tap or catheter or all the IVs and blood draws, etc. I was still pretty much in the other place for a long time. It felt like I was traveling through space or something. I saw and experienced a lot of amazing things I can't explain or remember well anymore, but I did try to write down some of it later. I wasn't scared. It felt like a really long journey. I didn't necessarily see anyone for a while, but I didn't feel alone. I felt the presence of others. It was like I was around everyone I ever knew or something. It felt quite familiar in a way. There was this black infinite darkness, and it was the most wonderful thing. It was like I could create experience with my imagination. There was no sadness. It was all bliss without worry. And it was very hypnotizing. I really considered letting myself go into it. Just letting go. My lungs were not kicking in on their own. If they had not, then I'm told I could have stayed dead, been paralyzed, or end up a vegetable. I didn't want to let go, though. I have a daughter who is my world. She was just about a year old at the time, and I kept thinking of her and her mother. It kept me from just letting go into that peaceful bliss. I couldn't leave them. I did get some of that life flashing before you type of experience. It looked like a projector was cast a bit in front of me and kind of like a movie, but I didn't see myself or anything like that. What I saw was almost like memories, except I hadn't had these yet. I saw my kiddo and her mom, maybe because I'd been thinking of them a lot, and they were smiling and happy. My daughter looked a couple of years older in that vision, though. There were a few visions, but all I saw was them, and I remember it made me feel quite happy. I would have smiled and cried if that had been possible. After that, it was getting quiet and dark. I remember it was all black. I didn't know how to get back. Black, the darkest I've ever seen, and felt so empty. Not scary, but I was in some infinitely large void. Time wasn't really a thing, but I was just sort of there for a good while. I remember seeing a tiny little dot of light so far away, just a little, and it was the only thing different from the blackness. Then I felt I was falling towards it or being pulled by some force. It felt like I was traveling very fast, like through space again, but it still took quite a long time, and the little thing got larger as I got closer. It was the size of the moon eventually. I just kept falling towards it. Eventually, when I got close enough, it felt like I was thrown back into myself with really great force. The white was blinding, and as I was back in, all my field of vision was initially incomprehensible, but the light died down and I was able to make out shapes, etc. I was still comatose. I couldn't move or speak or anything. I saw what looked like a hospital room, and at this point I still was not sure if this was real or not. No way. Nope. This can't be a dream, though they don't last this long and don't feel this real. The world still didn't make sense either. I thought I'd died and gone to or something, and I'd spend eternity trapped in my body, unable to move or do anything. I could hear sounds. I saw a clock on the wall, and I'd look over, but the time seemed all wrong, or it would jump around. There was a board on the wall with writing, but it made no sense. A window, tiny window on the left side, the only window to the outside, but all I could see was a brick wall. And a TV playing some nature stuff that really freaked me out. I couldn't see people for a while, which had me questioning reality. I'd see nurses kind of go past, but they didn't seem real at all. Yes, almost not even three-dimensional and choppy, unrealistic movement. They'd pass by, but it was almost like no one really noticed me. I knew it was real. Well, either I was in the hospital or I was dead, and in some sort of... Everything was becoming more detailed as time went on. I could read the board. People looked a lot more real. I felt the breathing tube, and my arms had been restrained so I wouldn't tear it out if I woke or something. I still couldn't talk or move or do anything, though. I remember seeing some family and friends asking me to wake up, crying, telling me a lot of things, holding my hand, and I couldn't do anything. That was the worst part for me, seeing how hurt they were, crying and telling me I had to fight, I had to start breathing on my own soon. I couldn't cry. I was trying to yell, but nothing. I couldn't grasp their hands. Time was weird. I don't know how much passed or whatever in between the several moments I remember. I know eventually I was by myself again. A doctor came in, and I guess I had regained a little movement and my lungs finally kicked in. She took out the breathing tube. It was bugging me when I had started to be able to move a little, and the catheter came out. Didn't feel it. Family was able to come in an hour or two later. I could hardly talk, just barely move hands, arms a little, turn my head a little. I developed the worst migraine I've ever known, worst pain I've felt, and that carried on for about a week nonstop. I got to hold my baby eventually. I have a picture of that somewhere. I don't know where I got the strength, but I picked her up and smiled, hugged her, after I lost all my strength again. Took a while, but I got to talk to a lot of people and doctors. In the following days, etc., slowly recovering, but in that time I couldn't eat really. I basically had water when possible. I couldn't keep food down for at least a week. Or sleep. I slept once for 30 minutes or so, but I felt the pain all the way through. Probably by day 3 or 4, I was able to start getting up and walk to the bathroom, etc. I was hospitalized for about a week before I could go home. This was a year ago. I'm still trying to get past that experience. I suppose I developed PTSD, and my anxiety got so bad in the following months going into full-blown agoraphobia. I had insomnia really bad for a while. I still do, actually. For about a month, I had nightmares about hospitals and feared I'd stop breathing if I fell asleep. Uncontrollable crying and broke down a lot when I had first came to, and for a good while after. I felt guilty because I missed being on the other side and had really considered just letting go into that amazing bliss. That peace. I missed it, and at times wished I had just stayed there. I left out a lot, but that's all I could get down at the moment. Story 18. My husband was in a coma for a couple weeks. He got pneumonia his freshman year of college. The coma was medically induced because he had a really bad immune system or something. He told me all he remembered was waking up really confused and with a really full beard. And when he did wake up, he was still in a lot of pain, so they gave him a ton of medicine and it made him kind of high and he wasn't all there when his friends visited. Story 19. I was in a medically induced coma following a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I don't remember much, but my family described moments of me appearing to be awake. Most notable, an apparent attempt at humor. Apparently, they put these emits on my hands to prevent me from ripping my ventilation tubes out over and over, but I pretended they were my lobster claws. I have no recollection, but it's a real me move. Edit gold was really too generous. Thank you so much. It's also my first gold, so big hugs to you, stranger. Edit 2, I've never known so much kindness, truly. My heart is very full right now. Story 20. I know this will get buried, but I'll post my experience anyway. I went to the hospital with renal failure and a pulse ox reading of 32. I remember the nurse saying my pee looked like root beer, and when she stabbed my arm to give me an IV, all she said was, "Uh-oh." My arm got really warm and my dad moved my head so I wouldn't see how much blood was coming out. Next thing I know, I'm in a hospital bed, tearing through the desert at 60 mph. Nothing but me in a hospital bed. No motor, nothing. Just cruising through the desert. I'd see all sorts of weird things. Most specifically was Ronald McDonald. I saw him all the time. Then my hospital bed would come to a screeching halt and I'd be in the living room of someone I knew. Grandma, good friends, former coaches. Basically any living room I had spent time in with someone I cared about. The weird thing was the living rooms were always three-walled. One wall was missing and beyond that wall was a barren desert. We would talk for a while about God knows what. Then it'd be pulled back into the desert cruising at 60 mph again. It happened over and over again. Sometimes the same living rooms would reappear, but almost all of them were unique. When I came out of the coma, everyone kept commenting how good my hair looked. I couldn't figure out why they kept saying that, so I finally asked my mom how long I'd been asleep. She said 13 days. And I had cards and flowers from all these people whose living rooms I'd been visiting in my coma. It was surreal, and I definitely can't explain it, especially since most of the cards came from people who weren't allowed to visit me in intensive care, and were sending well wishes in writing, not in person. Story 21. Ooh, I can answer this one. I was in a medically induced coma for 2 weeks. About 3 months ago, I had open heart surgery. It didn't go well. Had trouble coming off the ventilator, so they just put me in a coma to try to give me time to heal. I had nightmares the entire time from the medicine they were using to knock me out. I thought I had been kidnapped by a nurse and was a victim of trafficking. I thought my drug addict aunt had her friends rob my sister and her husband, killing my brother-in-law and one of their children. And I thought I was constantly being grabbed by people under my bed. It was not fun. I can't say that I knew I was in a coma or anything. I am usually one of those people that when I have a bad dream, I can tell myself it is just a dream and wake myself up in order to end it. This was not like that. I was convinced it was all really happening. Story 22. I was in a coma for 3 days. Unlike most people, I definitely knew time was passing but didn't know I was in a coma. I kept having weird hallucinations about running a restaurant with my brother, and I kept getting confused and wondering where I was and why I wasn't managing the restaurant. I've never worked at a restaurant, and I'm not sure why my brother was involved. Life didn't feel real for a few months following waking up. Edit dreams to hallucinations because it fits better. Story 23. 4 days or so. Traumatic brain injury. I knew time was passing, but not sure how fast. I can remember people being in the room with me, eyes were taped shut, and people taking. Story 24. ICU nurse here. We have patients that come back and tell us that it was pretty dreamlike. They also remember specific voices and some recall snippets of conversations in the room. Many of them experience memory problems or have vivid dreams for months afterwards. A lot of them get diagnosed with PTSD afterwards as well. Story 25. One time, I overdosed on meds and alcohol while in my locked room and woke up shortly afterwards, finding myself in my bed with my 2 housemates next to me, freaking out. I was so irritated that I didn't die, that I immediately got out of bed and shoved both of them away and stormed out the door without my phone or watch or wallet. I then did some dumb outside and cops took me to a mental hospital. It wasn't until the doctor told me the date did I realize I had actually been in a coma for like a week till this day. I'm still not sure how long I was out for exactly. So the coma felt like nothing. It felt like I somehow lost consciousness, fell asleep, and woke up shortly after. I didn't know I was in a coma until after the doctor told me. Story 26. My grandma had terminal pancreatic cancer and stage 3 lung or liver cancer. Can't remember, she went into a coma when her body was preparing for death. I know she could hear us though, BC when I was in the room by myself with her. I was telling her how much I loved her and she grunted and smiled. Story 27. Motorcycle accident. I should have been in hella pain, but I have no memory of it. No memory of pain, nothing. Woke up in a CAT scan tube thing, they are loud, no clue what happened. Found out days later. Glad they had good insurance. It was their fault. Story 28. 3 weeks at age 7. I had no idea, and would have these blips through time, but everything was wonky. We hit a tree doing 90 mep after our brakes gave out at the top of a mountain. I could hear the doctors, and there is this image that looks like pictures, but I don't see them in any physical manner, if that makes sense. They were octopus head people and had these crazy shapes everywhere that would fall into themselves and repeat. I think I may still have some lingering brain damage. I'd scream, I'm dead, in my head, and this warm glow would tell me, it's okay, you're here now. I have no idea where there was, but it was pretty comforting. I felt like I was on a cloud and I was weightless, zipping around everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. As I get older, I forget more and more, and my head is screaming at me not to forget. Like it was something important to remember, and I get angry because I can't remember that shape or that face or that place. I often get scared and wonder, am I going crazy? I'll see a light zip around me and leave this burning trail in the air. Or I'll see the blood vessels in my eyes and these of light that pulsate with my heartbeat. I'm super sensitive to electricity pulses and sometimes swear I see them in the air. I don't know if anyone has any similar experiences. I don't claim to know the answers of the universe, but I feel like that place is somewhere we can or do go. It's just so different I don't know how to describe it. Story 29. I was put in an induced coma for 3 weeks after I fell off a cliff. And when I woke up, I fully thought it was the day before my camping trip I fell on the second day. Story 30. This is really bizarre, but my uncle, a very serious, strict, and rather dry man, had an accident and went into coma a few years back. He never believed anything he couldn't touch. No talks about souls or anything similar. He was in coma for a few weeks until he woke up and had this crazy app story. He said he saw himself in a bubble, floating around in a white place, and it was peaceful and beautiful. But then he said about other bubbles he could see around him. All of them had other people in them. He distinctly remembered a black-haired woman singing in the bubble closest to his, until one day her bubble bursted and she disappeared. When he woke up, he could give a very clear description of her body, age, all that. Now the crazy bit. There was a woman, 1 floor below him, in a coma that sadly had passed away before he woke up. You guessed it, black hair, age, body, all correct. He had never met or seen this woman in his life. His whole idea of life changed after this. It still makes me think sometimes. Where was he? He thinks all the people in bubbles around him were patients in the same hospital. Could it be? Well, probably never know. Story 31. Been on induced coma for 5 days after a major surgery to remove one of my kidneys. From my perspective, it was just a few hours. I had 2 weird but vivid dreams, and the rest of the time I think I just blacked out. I had 2 ampules of morphine and oxycodone, so I guess that messed up with my perception of time, somehow. Story 32. My brother-in-law was in a coma for a month after a car accident in which he lost his eye and almost died. He said that he had a vision of God holding him underwater 3 times, almost drowning him the 3rd time, then him giving up and finally being led up into his hometown. Has had 1 almost fatal accident after that. And while I'm not superstitious, I do believe sometimes reality can echo the future in ways which our minds can perceive sometimes, even if we can't fully interpret those echoes. Well, I simply believe he's eventually going to have a 3rd accident. I fear for him. Story 33. My sister was in a coma for about 8 weeks. She has no memory of it. She has no memory either of her coming out of it. She had to relearn how to walk, how to talk, etc. She has some recollection of her relearning to walk, but only at the end when she was making real progress. Story 34 was in a coma for 3 weeks. During that time, I was deaf aware of people around me, of being in pain, and also at the same time, I had an alternate reality where my entire reason for returning to my life revolved around the knowledge that it was my turn to take care of a Native American woman I had never met, but whom I would meet in the future, and that I needed to recover for this reason. When I woke up, I actually pulled out all my tubes and tried to leave to start helping this person. Who lived where, I don't know. Help her how, I don't know. I thought I was on a reservation somewhere in Oregon, but was in fact in the city, at a very busy, huge hospital right in the middle of town. I have kinda always been looking for her since. Story 35. Within the last year or so, one of the writers for Kotaku.com had a serious health incident and complications following surgery and was placed into a medically induced coma for weeks. He recently wrote an article about the experience here. Story 36. Was in a coma for a week. I don't remember anything, and it took 2 to 3 weeks after I woke up to understand it was a car accident that put me there. I told everyone my husband and I had collided skiing, which did happen but certainly didn't cause any injury. I finally understood that we had had a head-on collision with a logging truck. Took another 3 years before I felt like myself again. Shitty time. But that was back in 2001, and my husband and I are still married. I've read that when one partner gets a brain injury, 90 of marriages fail as a result. True or not, I'm still proud of us. Story 37. My brother was in a coma for a few months due to collapsed lungs. I live in Michigan and he lives in Las Vegas, and on Christmas I flew out BC. They said he wasn't going to make it. Anyways, his wife and I spent the entire time in his hospital room talking and whatnot. Few months later he wakes up and he tells his wife that he remembers hearing me visit. However, he said he felt like he was trapped and buried alive. He couldn't move or talk, but could hear us, and he was terrified. This was 5 years ago, and he still has trouble sleeping because of the nightmares. He said they replay over in his head every time he goes to sleep. He also can't sleep in his bed, and will sometimes sleep on the floor couch BC. It reminds him of the hospital bed. He doesn't like to talk about it at all. We also had a friend who passed away during the time he was out, and he said he remembered having dreams about him as well, and they haunt him BC. He never got to say goodbye. Definitely PTSD from that situation. Story 38. Maybe this is a story of coincidence, or maybe there are certain memories or stimulation which can force you out of certain states? Who knows? It would be truly interesting if we could have had a functional MRI recording of his brain during the entire coma, just to see what the difference was. This is a true story. When my dad was dating my mom in high school, he would visit her at her parents' home. Her mom's parents also lived there. He would always talk to my great-grandfather, who was named Dave. Dave's favorite word was bullshit, and would call him bullshit and everything bullshit. My dad would mess with him by giving him a big kiss on his cheek when he wasn't paying attention. He would have been in his mid-70s at the time. My dad was 17. 20 years later, Dave is not doing well at 96 or so and ends up in a coma. He is unresponsive for several days but still alive. My dad goes to visit him and gets up in his face and started yelling bullshit Dave and gave him a big kiss on his cheek. Dave woke up from his coma just like that. Everyone was speechless except for Dave, who called him bullshit. He lives for a few more years after that. Great man. Illiterate till the day he died. Dropped out of school in the 2nd grade to work on a farm. Did not get drafted in WW2 because he worked on railroad engines. We'll never forget him. Also, I made this account so I could share this story. This thread is great, thanks all for sharing. Not sorry for the cursing because Dave never was. Story 39. I wish I could remember, but I was 2 years old when I fell into my coma, which was about a week long. For those wondering, I survived a house fire. 64 body burned. Story 40. Mine was chemically induced post-op and lasted 10 days. Had some really wild, vivid dreams during that time, including some hallucinations after revival. Did I know I was out? Only shortly before I was revived. The med staff around me somehow got through my brain fog. Story 41. Edit. Thanks for my first gold. I was in a coma for about 2 days when I was 22. I have Crohn's and had been in a severe flare for a few weeks prior. Lots of blood loss, unable to eat, dehydrated, etc. I fell asleep on my parents' couch. The next thing I remember is walking up in the ICU and thinking about how I needed to use the restroom. Since I had no idea what had happened or where I was, I just got up, or tried to anyway, and all the machines went off and a nurse came running into the room and told me to sit down. I don't remember anything that happened during the coma. No dreams, no sense of time moving, just like a dreamless sleep. Apparently, though, I was able to do basic commands in the coma. Like a doctor told me to open my eyes so they could take my contacts out. I'd squeeze a hand if told to, but otherwise I didn't move or respond to anything. I don't recall any of it, though. Doctors think I went into this coma as a way to preserve energy to keep me alive. I had to get 5 pints of blood and had IV drips in both arms while I was out. It's weird to think about how it happened. I was there, and yet I have no memories of it.